So if you're an Australian citizen, then your child will get Australian citizenship status. If you're an Australian permanent resident, your child gets Australian permanent residency status. If, say, you're a temporary resident of Australia, again, if you're on some form of a work visa, your child just mirrors whatever citizenship status you have. So that's how it kind of works. Between 2020 and 2021, anyone who was in Australia needed to apply for permission to leave the country. And what we gathered was the Australian Border Force made it pretty difficult for people to get that permission. It was a case-by-case basis. We had some clients who were successful in being able to travel out, others not. But that whole process has been made redundant. So right now, borders have opened up. As long as the person is fully vaccinated, they can just travel out of Australia without needing to apply for permission. And that applies both to Australian citizens, permanent residents, as well as anyone here on a temporary visa. So you could have people, say, on work visas out here. That cohort no longer needs to apply for permission to exit the country and equally to re-enter the country as well. So Australia sort of opened for business in that sense. It opened up on the 22nd of February. We're now seeing an increase in the number of people coming in on business tourist visas or just normal tourist visas. It's all pretty much open right now. But the main consideration, or the main sticking point here is it needs to be a vaccinated traveler. So anyone who's unvaccinated. And again, the unvaccinated policy is regardless of whether it's a personal choice or it's a medical reasons. If we come in contact with such a person, we always need to then defer to applying for permission. So say, for example, if you're unvaccinated and you want to leave the country, we got to apply for permission, and then we've got to get permission from the Australian Border Force before the person can leave. And likewise, if someone wants to travel to Australia who's unvaccinated, again, whether it's a personal choice or there are medical reasons behind it, we got to seek permission before that person travels into the country. I would anticipate, though, the vast majority of your clients would probably be vaccinated. Just based on the stats, it's not a personal thing, but the Australian population is 95% vaccinated, double vax. So right now, the other important point is it's double vax status, which allows a person to leave the country. We don't know whether the booster part of it will be thrown into the equation down the track, but right now, double vax, and then the person can travel in and out. In terms of then the environment generally, so things are opened up. So our clients or your clients will still be able to fly in and out of the country. We're also seeing an increase in the number of flights and people being able to travel to different parts of the world. So, for example, if this procedure had to happen in the US or South America, we're noticing that the visa systems are just open in these countries. So the person can just travel into the countries. I mean, going to the US, for example, there's no quarantine requirements. So the person can just go there, go in on a ETSA visa, and be able to just undertake whatever process which needs to be undertaken as part of this whole arrangement. So it looks to be pretty open these days. In terms then about timing, the important point about timing, about how all of this is going to work out, I think now that things have opened up, there are more options. Previously, it was pretty hard for people to travel, so we used to advise that once you have permission to travel out of the country, you go there towards the delivery, like when the child's about to be delivered, and then stay on while the citizenship application is being assessed, which takes about 2 to 3 months on average. Whereas these days, since there's more flexibility, parents, say, who have commitments can pick and choose to perhaps travel during the birth of the child and then maybe come back while the application's being processed and then return back to the country to bring the child to Australia. So basically 2 flights, that is a possibility. And I would say that would happen, say, if someone has work commitments, they can't wait in, say, one of the countries, for example, Colombia, for like 2 months while the citizenship application is pending, so they have that luxury. Or they can also choose to just be in Australia, not necessarily be there for the birth of the child. I don't know whether that's a popular option, I suspect not, but like that were to happen, not necessarily be there for the birth of the child. We put in the citizenship application. Once the application is approved, they may then choose to fly over and fly back to Australia. Or there could be a split sort of arrangement where one parent travels and maybe the other one flies after, and maybe perhaps both flies back. There's just more of that flexibility about, borders being open gives people option about how they want to fit in and pick the arrangement to their personal circumstances at that given point in time. So there are two options. If the baby has citizenship status, say if it's a US citizen, if the baby then is able to obtain a US passport, we can bring the baby back on a tourist visa initially. That's being linked to the US passport, so bring the baby back on a tourist visa. And then once the baby is in Australia, we push to get the citizenship application prioritized. Once that's approved, then the baby doesn't need to leave the country. That's one option. The alternative is to wait in the host country, whether it's the US or wherever else, wait until the citizenship status is approved, apply for an Australian passport, and that way just fly back to Australia with the Australian passport. The second option is cleaner because it removes the need of having to apply for a visa, as well as trying to push immigration to process the application quicker, because sometimes it's not well received. They don't like it necessarily if you push them too hard. So it's a cleaner option, but it's also something where it depends on the circumstances of the parents as well, whether they have the luxury of waiting with the baby for the 2 or 3 months while the citizenship is being processed. So, and that's the other key point. You can only apply for the passport, the Australian passport, after the citizenship is approved. And the timing lag always is to get the citizenship approved. Once that has happened, the process of getting the passport itself, to my knowledge, is pretty quick. It varies across different countries. It could be quick in the US, could be slightly slower in parts of South America, but on general, between 2 to 4 weeks. You would apply for an emergency passport. You want to get the child that emergency passport status to bring the child back as quickly as possible. So most times we have that initial conversation when our clients are sort of thinking about going through the process. So they just want to understand what's involved from the visa/citizenship side of things. They talk to people like yourself about the procedures and the process as well. So we have that initial conversation. And then once there is a decision made with choosing the provider and going through the process itself, they go through it. And then when it's successful, when the insemination is successful, then we sort of get involved in the process. So I would sort of anticipate maybe the 3rd to 4th month, maybe after the 1st or 2nd trimester, that's when we get involved. That's when we know things are progressing well. And that's when we officially get involved in the process. So a conversation at first, just so they understand the process. Give it a couple of months once they're ready. And then after maybe the 1st or 2nd trimester, we then get involved and have an actual representation and open a file and start the process. So it's on average about $250. That's fees payable to the Department of Home Affairs for the citizenship application. Our office sort of does a fixed fee arrangement, and we generally charge between $3,500 to about $4,500 plus GST. We would initially have a conversation with our client to understand the circumstances, and then we will arrive at that fixed fee quote at the start of the matter itself. But that's generally the range we would go. Based on the clientele we have, and we've done same-sex couples, we've done heterosexual couples, we've done single parents as well, generally there's no difference in the process. Each one has its own quirks. We'll adjust the advice and documents needed in terms of the process, but we've not noticed any variances in terms of the processing standards or in terms of the requirements. So it's all treated the same. sort of depends according to the individual's circumstances. But the main sort of documents we'll need as part of the process is the identification documents. That's pretty expected. There are some forms to be filled in. There are forms which the doctor who delivers the baby needs to complete as well. And as part of this process, we prepare everything. But the other part, which we try and get right at the start of the process, is the agreement between our clients and the clinics and the surrogate, making sure all of that is aligned and making sure that covers all bases which the Australian regulatory authorities want to see. There's no set template. I've been asked this question, whether there is a set template which the agreement needs to cover. Based on the experience we have, not necessarily. We've seen many, and they all have been well received by the Department of Home Affairs out here. So there's not one standard which needs to follow through. But the agreement just needs to very clearly capture who's involved in this agreement itself and who's the surrogate. That's sort of the main thing. Another key document which occasionally delays the process is getting the identification documents for the surrogate themselves. So like either their passport or their identification card or documents. That occasionally delays the process just because it's not in there. People sort of say, oh, what is this being used for? Where's it being sent to? And they just are a bit hesitant about releasing that information. That's the part we notice a bit of resistance. But overall, we've not had anyone say to us, like, I'm not going to share it with you. It's not come to that stage. So yeah, identification documents, some forms to be completed, making sure the commercial agreement is all set in place, as well as some of the identification documents from the surrogate. That's all the cases we've managed. And I'll add, by all the cases we've managed so far, we've been, I wouldn't say lucky, but we've been able to avoid having Home Affairs ask our clients to do a DNA test. I want to raise this because it's actually at the case officer's discretion. If they wanted to, they can ask our clients to undertake a DNA test with using the baby and our client's sample to make sure that there is a relationship between the parties. Now, we've been able to avoid that, and part of the reason I think has to do with the level of documentation we provide Home Affairs. It's because if they've got concerns, then they ask an individual to undertake a DNA test. So just also be prepared. We can't obviously guarantee that it'll never happen, but I guess clients should be aware that there could be a possibility of the need of a DNA test. And if that were to happen, it needs to be undertaken in a test facility which is designated by Home Affairs. So it can't be any other test facility you pick and choose. They have a list of facilities in each country, and we have to go through that process with that particular test facility. Based on the conversations I've had, and where we come into the picture, I think we're just part of the picture itself. Based on what I know and what I see, it's a very personal choice. It's about the person being ready for the responsibilities and the cost and the process and the commitment. I think when that all is aligned correctly, when people are ready and fully committed to the process, the citizenship side, what we do, we try and minimize the friction as much as possible. So this is just part of the equation, getting your child the Australian citizenship status. It's not sort of the main necessarily focus or sticking point or the stressful point in this step. It's about the parents being committed. And I guess ask yourself that question, like if you're really committed to the process, if you're sure you want to go through it, if you're invested into the process, just know that we are here to resolve this whole citizenship part. That shouldn't be the stressful part in this whole process. It's just part of it, but our clients just need to be prepared. So that's what we notice. So sometimes we have clients who come back to us after 3 months. Some come back to us after a year and a half. And, we understand why. It's a huge financial commitment and personal choice as well. But when you're ready to go through the process, then just go through it, and then you'll have everyone here to support you as part of it. I think the best way is probably to reach me through my email or phone, just initially to set up some time for us to speak. We like to sort of put aside at least half an hour to an hour to really walk our clients through the process, just help them understand where it's going from there, and then let them consider all of that information. And then once they have that, once they start the process, then we can always get in contact with them. Again, depending on how far, maybe it's the first or the second trimester as part of the process, that's when we can get involved in the picture. But yeah, have that initial chat with us just so that they understand the considerations. I tried to cover as much of it here, but everyone's circumstances is obviously unique. So always do feel free to reach out and we can sort of have a more in-depth discussion.
GSHC